Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Evyenia Walton. I'm a special counsel here at DW Fox Tucker Lawyers, and I welcome you to our very first SME seminar series presentation on cybersecurity and why it matters. So I begin today by acknowledging the Kaurna people as the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather here today, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. So we are really excited to be presenting this SME seminar series to you as a free lunch and learn session. It's been specifically designed for business owners and people that are involved in administration of business, so that we can better understand and navigate the risks, especially in an ever-changing environment such as cybersecurity. So we do have a lot of content today. I will try and go through it in quite a succinct manner. But if you do have any questions that arise during the presentation, please feel free to put up your hand and we can talk about that as we go forward. So I want to start off by, and I know this is a little bit unorthodox, but I want you all to close your eyes. Close your eyes and take yourself back in time to March 2020. COVID's just happening. Trying to run your business and navigate all of this crazy uncertainty. Employees don't know, do they need to come to work? Are they going to have a job? You don't know what's happening with your customer contracts. Is that force majeure clause strong enough to navigate through this next period of uncertainty? You've got to close your eyes. You've got to think. Oh, you have? Oh, okay. All of a sudden, your phone starts blowing up. I think you've been hacked. You're getting calls from people that you hadn't heard of from about 3 years ago. I think something's going on with your emails. I'm suddenly getting very strange invoices from you. What's happening? All of a sudden, you realise that your email has been compromised and someone is in your emails at exactly the same time as you. You've got global administrator access to your business where all of your client data sits. What do you do? Where do you start? So I want to leave that with you and we'll come back to that at the end. Just think about it. Okay, so I want to start by just giving you a bit of an overview of the presentation. We're looking at the definition of cybersecurity and the legal landscape around the protection of personal information under the Privacy Act. We'll also be looking at a brief history of what cybercrime is in Australia, what happened during COVID. We'll be looking at some of the statistics. Then we'll look at some of the current resources that are available and some of the government initiatives as well. Looking briefly at the data breaches that Medibank, Optus suffered, and the most recent ones of IPH Limited and Latitude Financial. Then we'll be exploring the Essential 8 that have been developed by the Australian Cybersecurity Centre. And then we'll have a brief look at what's going on in the EU and with the General Data Protection Right and how they address the issues of data protection. And then we'll come back to questions and some of your thoughts around that scenario that I've just given you now. Okay, so according to the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, the definition of cybersecurity is measures used to protect the confidentiality, integrity and availability of systems and data. A cybersecurity event is defined as an occurrence of a system, service, or network state indicating a possible breach of security policy, failure to safeguard, or previously unknown situation that may be relevant to security. A cybersecurity incident is defined as an unwanted or unexpected cybersecurity event or a series of such events that has either compromised business operation or has a significant probability of compromising business operations. So as a small business, you may be thinking, well, I don't really know if I sit under the Privacy Act or not. And I'll tell you why. So under the Privacy Act, there are exemptions for small business that have a turnover of $3 million or less. However, most businesses have contractual rights to protect personal information. So, and via those contractual rights, you are essentially buying in to be an APP entity under the Privacy Act. So what does an APP entity mean? It is an agency, an organisation, or a small business owner. So an organisation could be an individual, body corporate, partnership, other unincorporated joint venture, or a trust. That is not a small business operator, a registered political party or agency, or a prescribed instrumentality of a state or territories, such as a university. So a small business is defined in the Privacy Act under Section 6D as being a small business at the time in a financial year whose annual turnover for the previous financial year is $3 million or less. Now, the reason that I bring this up is because as a small business, a lot of small business owners do not intend on just being small. And so the crossover to when the turnover crosses over to over the $3 million is quite significant, because if a business owner starts off as thinking, oh, well, I don't really need to comply with the Privacy Act because I'm too small, well, then when they reach that threshold, they don't have the proper systems in place. So one of the key things that I advise my clients is that when you're setting up a business, you need to have your privacy policy and understand your privacy obligations at the outset, because by the time you reach that $3 million turnover, you're not going to have time to go back and do it. So do it now and understand it now. So these are the Australian privacy principles. There are 11 of them. If you're not familiar with the Australian privacy principles now, I strongly recommend that you jump onto the privacy website and familiarise yourself with them. So these are the obligations under the Privacy Act to manage data and personal information. Okay, so this is where the privacy policy becomes really important, because it needs to address all of these privacy principles and make the appropriate disclosures to your clients, to your suppliers, to your employees about how you're going to collect, use and store that personal information, how they can access it, how they can make a complaint. Okay, so for today's presentation, we'll be looking at APP3, which is the collection of solicited personal information. APP6, use or disclosure of personal information. And also APP11, which is security of personal information. So APP11, for those that can't read the screen up there, says an APP entity must take reasonable steps to protect personal information it holds from misuse, interference and loss, and from unauthorised access, modification or disclosure. An entity has obligations to destroy or de-identify personal information in certain circumstances. So as we'll see later on, this is something that some of these big organisations that have been hit with recent cyber attacks have failed to do or haven't done it correctly. Okay, so just a quick word on the updating of the Privacy Act. So following the Medibank and Optus data breaches last year, there was a review undertaken as to how we can better protect personal information under the Privacy Act. And the main view was to compel organisations that have breached their obligations to comply with government authorities in the investigation of these incidents, but also to impose penalties on organisations that allow these events to occur because they do not have the appropriate systems or safeguards in place. So the privacy review came up with a bunch of different recommendations, which were then enshrined in the Amendment Act that came into effect last December. So it also does give the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner enhanced powers to request information and conduct compliance assessment of the notifiable data breach scheme. And it gives them further enforcement powers as well to conduct external reviews and internal procedures and publish notices about specific privacy breaches. Okay. So what is cybercrime? Where did it come from? Is this a new thing? Well, actually, it's not, and I'll show you why. So according to the Australian Federal Police, in Australia, the term cybercrime is used to describe both crimes directed at computers or other information communication technologies, such as computer intrusion and denial of service attacks, and crimes where computers or ICTs are an integral part of the offence, so such as online fraud. According to the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission, cybercrime covers a wide variety of offences that present a significant threat to Australians, including identity crime, computer hacking, phishing, botnet activity, computer-facilitated crime, and cyber intrusion directed at private and national infrastructure. Advances in technology have offered new opportunities for serious and organised crime, which use increasingly sophisticated methods of to counter law enforcement efforts. Cyber criminal groups can target thousands of Australians simultaneously from anywhere in the world through the capability through dark web forums and marketplaces where they share tools, techniques and information. Whilst there is no fixed history of cybercrime, many experts point to certain events as the first known hacks. Here is a brief overview of cybercrime events throughout history. So the first one is the telegraph system. In 1834, two thieves infiltrated the French telegraph system, gained access to financial markets and stole data. Many experts consider this event as the first cybercrime, followed by other cybercrimes, each focusing on newly invented technologies. So you can see that this concept has been around for a very, very long time. The next one I wanted to talk about was the telephone system. So in the 19th and 20th centuries, there were attacks focused on the telephone system. In 1876, Alexander Graham Bell patented the telephone, which allowed transmitting speech using telegraphy. 2 years after the commercialisation of this invention, teenage boys broke into Bell's telephone company and misdirected calls. In later years, during the 1960s to the 1980s, phone hacking became quite popular. So in 1940 as well, just talking about ethical hacking. So in 1940, René Camille, a French computer expert, hacked into the Nazi data registry. Camille, a punch card computer expert, used his expertise to program Nazi punch card machines to prevent them from registering information correctly. His work blocked the Nazis' attempts to register and track Jewish people. In the 1980s, phishing scams and malware became popular. So emails as being a popular communication tool in the 1980s and 1990s, we saw that hackers started using email attachments to deliver malware and phishing scams and web browsers to spread computer viruses. Moving into the 2000s, social media scams became quite popular and saw social media networks gaining worldwide popularity. Hackers started utilising these platforms for data theft and other cyber crimes. In the following years, cyber criminals improved malware infections and data theft techniques. Today, these attacks are deployed in the thousands, constantly increasing with no signs of slowing down. There's also been hacking in the Internet of Things. So this has provided cyber criminals with a wealth of hacking opportunities. IoT technology upgrades for ordinary objects such as washing machines, refrigerators, light bulbs and heating systems that have internet capabilities. Since these devices are connected to the internet, cyber criminals can hack them and cause damage that extends to the physical world. So cyberspace has become a battleground in Australia. It is increasingly being used in warfare. Russia's use of malware designed to destroy data and computers from booting in the Ukraine. And in July 2021, the Australian government publicly distributed exploitation of Microsoft Exchange vulnerabilities to China's Ministry of State Security. Some of the most common cyber crimes in 2021 and 2022 were directed at individuals for online shopping and banking. Business email compromise also became very popular and trended towards targeting high-value transactions like property settlements. Ransomware attacks remain the most destructive cybercrime, and hundreds of thousands of Australians have lost their personal information in the last few years. The cost extends beyond paying the ransom demands for system reconstruction and productivity, and also lost customers. I just wanted to interject here and say that with the rise of cybercrime in Australia, it has also brought about the importance of having cyber insurance. So cyber insurance is something that a small business or any business can take out in order to protect against loss of data and also business interruption if there was a cyber attack to occur. So if you work for a company that does not have cyber insurance, I strongly recommend that you look into this, and I'll tell you why a bit later on. Okay, so we have also seen some of the rapid exploitation of critical public vulnerabilities as well. If there's unpatched systems and networks, then often these are used as the entry points for higher value targets. So this is where you'll start hearing, terminology like, going through the back door or finding some backdoor entry points in order to compromise the system. Okay, so we saw an increase of cyber crime activity during COVID, as this was a very uncertain time for many people, especially in Australia and in business. That saw opportunities for cyber criminals to really exploit business. So we did see in that period of time My Budget did get hacked. Actually, I think the Australian police also got hacked. So there were a number of quite high profile hacks during that time that took quite a number of weeks to get back. So I think, for example, with My Budget, she lost about 3 weeks of productivity. And if you can understand the how big that business is and how many people would have been affected by that, it's quite significant. And this is cybercrime, in its infancy, where we're starting to really learn about the ramifications of it. So just to give you a few statistics, so in March 2020, the Australian Cyber Security Centre received more than 95 cybercrime reports, approximately 2 per day, about Australians losing money or personal information, to COVID-19 themed scams or online frauds. It responded to 20 cybersecurity incidents affecting COVID-19 response services. And there was it also disrupted over 150 malicious COVID-19 themed websites with assistance from Australia's major telecommunication providers, Google and Microsoft. So COVID-19 also saw a dramatic increase in working from home. So while this protected workspaces from viruses, there were many home networks that were just largely unprepared to be at the same level of security as what the offices were. So that allowed further opportunity. So this is just some examples of some of the scams specifically around COVID that were being used at the time. Okay, so I'm going to bore you with statistics for a bit, but there are some really cool graphs coming up, so just bear with me, okay? So there has been an increase in financial losses due to business email compromise to over $98 million. There has been a rise in the average cost of cybercrime reported to be over $39,000 for small business. So this is in terms of loss, and $88,000 for medium business, and over $62,000 for large business. And as an average, it's an increase of 14%. There's been a 25% increase in the number of publicly reported software vulnerabilities, and over 76,000 cybercrime reports as an increase of 13% from the previous financial year. So on average, a cybercrime event occurs every 6 minutes. Every 7 minutes on average. There was over 25,000 calls to the cybersecurity hotline, which is an average of 69 calls a day, and an increase of 15% from the previous financial year. Fraud, online shopping and online banking were the top reported cybercrime types, accounting to 54% of all reports. So looking here, you can see the cybercrime report rates compared in 2021 compared to 2022, significantly higher. This is some of the data broken down in terms of state. So Queensland has got quite a significant amount of cybercrime reporting. This is the cybercrime by types. Do you hope that you've got, yes you do, you've got some colour copies, excellent. So fraud is quite a big area, online shopping as well, and online banking. And this just shows the average of the reported loss by all the organisations that I previously talked about in 2021 and 2022. So for a small business, that's quite a significant amount. even for large business as well. You know, it's quite a big, that's quite a big chunk out of your bottom line. Not to mention lost productivity, time and opportunities as well. So it really does pay to be prepared to handle an event. Okay, so what are some of the current resources that are available in Australia? So there's the cybercrime law, which goes back to the Commonwealth Criminal Code, and it includes computer and telecommunication offences under Part 7.3, 10.6 and 10.7. So each state and territory as well has cybercrime related offences and legislation to complement this. There is a national plan to combat cybercrime as seen in the Australia's Cybersecurity Strategy 2020. That's also just about to be updated. There's a 2022 national plan to combat cybercrime as well. That's just recently been released. It's currently in a consultation and feedback stage. There's also, so the Council of Europe Convention of Cybercrime, which Australia has acceded to, and that the objectives of that are to harmonise domestic legal frameworks on cybercrime and provide for domestic powers to investigate and prosecute cybercrime and establish an effective regime of international legal cooperation. Okay, so the Australian Security Cybercrime Centre is a wealth of resource. So if there's one thing that you write down today, it's this: www.cyber.gov.au. Go there, become familiar with it. It has a lot of resources, some of which I'll touch on as well at the end of the presentation. But if this is your one-stop shop to understanding all things cyber, and how, and it also gives guidance on some of the technical IT things that you need to be implementing in your business, so that you can reach a certain level of maturity in terms of cyber security, which I'll also talk about a little bit later on. So it's the leading national cyber security authority. It brings together cybersecurity capabilities from all across the Australian government, includes staff from the AFP, Australian Signals Directorate, Department of Home Affairs, Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission and the Australian Signals Intelligence Organisation. So it provides a means to report cybercrime, research, education, strategies, alerts, advisories, manuals, publication, guidance and resources on cybersecurity. Also would direct you to the Office of the E-Safety Commissioner. This was established in 2015 to mandate and coordinate the lead for online safety efforts across government, industry and the non-for-profit community. ScamWatch as well is run by the ACCC to protect consumers and small business, and teaches them how to recognise, avoid and report scams. Okay, so some of the key Australian government actions are listed up here. We've got the Australian Cybersecurity Strategy, which is about to be updated, the Security Centre, Australia's Cyber and Critical Tech Cooperation Program, International Cyber and Critical Technology Engagement Strategy. There's the Cybersecurity Cooperative Research Centre, the Growth Network and the Australian Information Security Evaluation Program and Digital Economy Strategy. Now, the Department of Defence as well has also announced a key focus in cyber warfare as well, and we'll be putting some money and resources towards that, is recently been announced in the budget, but we need to have a bit more understanding as to how they'll actually look at implementing that. But to know that it is across all sectors of the government as a key priority. Other pictures. Okay. So Medibank, the Medibank data breach was one of the most publicised and surprising data breaches, I think, to come out in the last year. It held a significant amount of data that was subsequently sold on the dark web. Unsurprisingly, there are a number of class actions against Medibank. And if you are a Medibank customer, I strongly urge you to join the class actions. There are a number of firms that are running those. Morris Blackburn, I think Shine Lawyers being just two. Because this will set a significant precedent. This is the first one. Optus was one as well, but the ones against Medibank are quite significant, and I know that our firm will be watching with bated breath as to how that unfolds. So what happened there? So they found a back door into the system, and they were able to exploit the vulnerabilities in that system and do this in a very short period of time. So it compromised millions of customers' data, including former and current customers, names, dates of birth, addresses, phone numbers, emails, and some Medicare card numbers, passport numbers, and health claim data. So anything that has ever been claimed has been accessed. And as you can imagine, this will give the cyber criminals a significant snapshot into how you use the service and also what you've been claiming for. So it is a significant, intrusion into your health information. So in December 2022, the Office of the Australian Information Commission commenced an investigation into the breach to determine whether Medibank took reasonable steps to protect the personal information of their customers, as well as whether they took reasonable steps to comply with the Australian privacy principles. So if the OAIC decide that Medibank failed to protect its customers' information, then they will be liable to pay compensation to the customers for the loss and damage suffered. So just this week, Slater and Gordon lodged another class action in the federal court against Medibank. So in September 2022, Optus was also subject to a major cyber attack. 10 million customers had personal data, including names, dates of birth, addresses, phone and email contacts, and passport and driver's license numbers stolen. Ransom threats were made. An investigation into potential class action against Optus, like Medibank, to the OAIC for breach of the Privacy Act. And did they take reasonable steps to protect personal information from misuse, interference and loss, or from unauthorised access, modification or disclosure? So just in March as well, we saw two other significant cyber attacks. The first was IPH Limited, who actually owns two member firms in the space of intellectual property, and also Latitude Financial. So Latitude was quite significant because there was a large, just trying to find the statistic. I think since I did this, it's gone up. I think it was about, was it 10 million customers? It was about 10 million. But their stocks sunk 12% after the attack. So they both worked with the necessary authorities to remedy and investigate the breach, and also took their platforms offline while the investigation remained active. So again, we'll be watching to see what comes out of these data breaches. So I previously mentioned the Australian Cyber Security Centre and some of the steps that we can take in order to assess our current maturity against cyber threats and what resources are available. So the Australian Cyber Security Centre has developed and prioritised mitigation strategies in the form of strategies to mitigate cybersecurity incidents. Okay, and this helps organisations protect themselves against various cyber threats. So the most effective of these mitigation strategies are the Essential 8, which I'll show on the next slide. So the Essential 8 has been designed to protect Microsoft Windows-based internet-connected networks. So it is primarily Microsoft focused, but it does apply to non-Microsoft environments as well. Okay, while implementing the Essential 8, organisations should identify and plan for a targeted maturity level suitable for their environment. So the maturity levels stem from maturity 0 to maturity level 3, and I'll talk about that a little bit more as well. So, well, maturity level 0 is essentially you're not really prepared for a cyber attack. Maturity level 3 is the most prepared that you can be in terms of a sophisticated attack. So when an organisation looks at implementing the Essential 8 or making that assessment against the criteria, it's about understanding what level of sophistication your systems and processes have in order to stave off a cyber threat. So I'll give you some examples. So if you're a bank, you're constantly testing your own environments to see whether or not all of the back doors have been shut. So there are companies out there that will literally try to hack you to test what your response is going to be and to test your level of maturity. So you can understand, especially in the banking and finance sector, it is hugely important to make sure that the data is not only that there's a level of understanding that data protection is everybody's responsibility within the organisation, but to consistently test your systems to ensure that there are no vulnerabilities. If there are vulnerabilities that are exposed, then that's your signal that you need to do something about it. And this needs to happen on a constant basis, not just when there might be a threat or something's happened to someone else. You know, it needs to be consistently. How consistent that is will depend on what your level of risk is. Okay. So organisations also need to consider the likelihood of being targeted, and it's influenced by the desirability of adversaries. The consequences of a cybersecurity incident will depend on the requirement of the confidentiality of the data, as well as the requirement for the availability and integrity of their systems and data. So this is the Essential 8. Okay, so these are the pillars in which an organisation can measure its level of maturity on. The cyber.gov.au has a very comprehensive assessment guide to assist organisations in making their own assessments and understanding what they need to do in order to better protect their data against cybersecurity, cyber incidents occurring. Okay, so things like user application hardening is something where you're not using default settings for applications. Okay, so if you're using default settings for applications, it makes a lot more easier for cyber criminals to hack you because they're very well aware of what those settings are. But if you can, harden the user application settings, then the harder it's going to be. The harder it's going to be for someone to try and exploit that as a vulnerability. I could do a whole session on the Essential 8 and notifiable data breaches. So if anyone does actually want a session on that, can you please let us know in the feedback? And I'll tailor a session specifically to what happens if, what the process is as to how you notify a data breach and what happens in the investigative powers of the OAIC and what you need to do in order to cooperate. So if anyone is really interested in that, please let us know and we can do another presentation in that regard. Okay, so just briefly, because I don't want to rattle on for too much longer, because I do want to come back to the example that I gave you at the beginning and then have some room for discussions, is looking at how the EU addressed the issues concerning the protection of personal information, especially in the digital age. So they were quite progressive in their thinking and came up with the General Data Protection Regulations in 2018. So from May 25, 2018, the GDPR came into effect, and essentially what it does is it protects the personal information of the people within the EU. So if I'm in the EU and I'm looking at web pages either still within the EU or outside of the EU, the GDPR applies. So even if you're an Australian organisation, if you're trying to attract customers from overseas that are in the EU, you will need to comply with the GDPR and ensure that your privacy policy appropriately reflects the GDPR and the obligations that you need to comply with. Okay, but if you do need some help, let us know because we can certainly help you with that. So it does levy harsh fines against violations of the privacy and security standards, and also does attach penalties as well, reaching into the tens of millions of euros. So what can I say? Let's talk about data security under the GDPR. Okay, so there is a requirement, so for companies that obtain information from individuals, they must ensure that they are handling their data and implementing appropriate technical and organisational measures. So the technical techniques that they need to be implementing include two-factor authentication and using end-to-end encryption. They also need to ensure that they have appropriate organisational understanding, including the provision of staff training, integrating data privacy policies and limiting employees' access to personal data. So it's a real need to know mentality. If you don't need to know or have access to it, then you don't have access to it. It also allows an owner of the personal information to, it gives you a right to be forgotten, which is something that Australia has been looking to implement for a number of years. So the right to be forgotten essentially means that if you hold my personal information and I don't want you holding it anymore or your suppliers holding it, I say to you, I want the right to be forgotten. And that means that you need to forget my data. All of your suppliers or third parties who you've given my data to also need to forget me. Okay, so it's not just an obligation on the organisation that holds the data, but it also to go down the line as well. Okay, so if you think about the data that you collect in your organisation, how you use it and who you disclose that data to, it's about making sure that all of those people that may have potentially been exposed to that data or have access to it, completely remove it from their system. All right. So I think that's one thing that the EU actually does extraordinarily well. Okay, so what are some of the things that we can do to better protect our data? Firstly, and I know this is an old chestnut, we need to do regular backups. Back up everything. Back it up daily. Back it up hourly. Just back it up. If you can't remember the last time you backed up your data, it's too long ago. Okay, so you need to ensure that you know how often your data is being backed up, and if possible, just continue to back that up. The longer between backups obviously means that there's more of a risk that the data is lost. Okay, so even daily backups, you think of how big, if your organisation is quite large, or the amount of data that would go into the system in one day. So you'd really need to be looking at hourly backups or backups in real time, which I know some of the cloud services do offer. But you need to understand what your backup history is like, and make sure that you fully understand what that looks like. Okay, and also have multiple backups, so that if one fails, you can always call on another one. Okay, and encrypt important information. So does everybody here know what encryption means? Do you know what it means? It basically means keeping it secret or scrambling it up, right? So you need to make sure that network encryption is on as an absolute minimum. It converts your data into a secret code before you send it, is essentially what it is. And it reduces the risk of theft, destruction, or tampering. You can turn on network encryption through your router settings, or by installing a virtual private network solution on your device. Using two-factor authentication. So this is really critical in the event that you have multiple social media and other accounts. I think banking as well has really pushed towards multi-factor authentication. If you're not familiar with it, it's something that you need to upskill. But basically, what it is that our site will not allow you in unless you have something that's with you that you can send a code to. So, for example, if you're getting into your banking, it may send you a code in order to do a specific transaction, or if there's multiple access points within an organisation, it can send a code to a specific number, and then verify that the user is actually the user that's wanting to access the service. Manage paraphrases as well. So does anyone here use a password manager for their? Yeah, password managers are really, really good because it means that you can have quite sophisticated passwords, but that you don't have to remember them all. So there are a number of password managers. Google Chrome actually has one inbuilt, but there's also more sophisticated ones as well that you can either access for free, but there's also paid ones as well. Okay, so monitoring use of computer equipment and systems. There is software as well that will allow you to remote desktop in. So if you've got employees across different jurisdictions or that work from home, you can install software on there, disclosing, of course, that you can install software that will allow you to remote in at any point to see what they're working on and what they're doing. What else? Protecting your customers. So having a really good privacy policy in place is key. The new reforms have introduced some more stringent obligations. So this is a really good time to review your privacy policy and make sure that it's still working for you. You don't want to be caught with being exposed to risk about penalties as well. And get updates on the latest risks. So the ACNC also releases alerts as well. So if you're a Microsoft organisation, they are actually really useful. So you'll receive, alerts on where there's potential vulnerability in the Microsoft suite, which then you can forward through to IT and they can, install a patch. But that's just some of the ways that we can better secure our data. All right, so before questions though, I want to come back to this, this scenario. So does anyone have an idea of what you would do in that scenario? Does anyone have a thought? What's the first one? What's the first one that you would do?
Shut them down and get your IT people to come and block all your firewalls and check what passwords within and report it. And also get your stuff off of everything and get them to change password, but you've already got multi-factor, which means one of those factors to be compromised.
And so what happens if you're working on a really important thing that's time critical? What would that impact?
Of course it would. So therefore, you'd be lucky if your insurance kicks in, because the amount of things they want, and you've ticked all the boxes, and then they want the next level, and they don't pay everything with the excess that they charge, and they ask you everything under the sun. And if your IT person has ticked all the boxes, they're still not happy unless you've got money like Optus to put all these other things into place. And believe me, normal businesses, medium or large, aren't Qantas, don't have the money and can't do that. So we have put out limitations that insurance actually don't cover and pay the hunts.
Is that right?
It is.
Okay. We might have to have a chat after this. Yeah, I think so. Okay, so the reason I gave that scenario is because that actually happened to me. Okay, I had a business. I still have it, but that's a different story. March of 2020, COVID's happening. I'm working on a really, really big, and I'm talking this was big, huge client file. And then all of a sudden, my phone is blowing up. People I hadn't heard from for 3 years, barristers, other lawyers from other law firms. Ev, I think you've been compromised. You're sending me emails with invoices. What's going on? Right? All of a sudden, I'm noticing all this really crazy activity happening in my inbox. I've been hacked. First thing I do, everyone gets off their computers, shut everything down, call IT. Because it was COVID, I could not get anyone to come to my office. No one would come. There was just one person that came, and that guy was my web hosting guy and didn't know anything really about cyber. But he came down and he's like, okay, let's try and sort something out. It was really, really, really scary. And I'm a pretty tech savvy person, I think. But it just goes to show that it could happen to anyone at any time. And if you don't have at least a good understanding of what to do next, it can get really, really overwhelming, because you don't know what they've got, you don't know what they've used, you don't know if they've got and what they've used and how they're going to use it. Okay, so I was lucky. I think cyber insurance really came to the table for me, but it was in March of 2020.
Yes, yeah, they've changed a lot since then to now, but they've got a lot more stipulations in.
Well, what happened to me was that they sent me a forensic. So what happens is they need to do a forensic analysis of your network, right? So they'll send you a little black box to do a forensic analysis. But I was in a shared office at the time, right? And so I had to make sure that when I was doing the forensic analysis of my network, that it wasn't going to interfere with anyone else's network as well. And the people that did the forensic analysis were based in New York. So trying to find a time where they could actually run the analysis was really, really difficult. So and I was a relatively small business. I only had a couple of staff, but the amount of fear and anxiety and sleepless nights that I had when it happened to me has really prompted me to become passionate about this area, which is why I'm an advocate for it. So yeah, that's pretty much my story. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, great presentation. Well, thank you. Probably what you just went through there, it probably relates very strongly to the Medibank Latitude, all of those big companies, it wasn't actually the technical breach is one thing, that's certainly not any question, but the capacity of the company to respond and manage that.
Yes.
And I think it doesn't even matter whether it's 2 people or 2,000 or 20,000, the capacity to run through a scenario, even if it's just once a year, say what happens if, might help your confidence to go, if we get hacked, what have we got? And I spend a lot of my time doing crisis response. That's sort of where I work in. So in a lot of that space is to get business thinking about that, so they then know if we do get hacked, ring the cyber insurance or ring the specialist provider. They then know that, because then it enables the technical people to do their bit. Management, I think a lot of the problem with Medibank Latitude was corporate arrogance, that the board and the management just had no idea and thought they could just bulldoze their way through it.
And it shouldn't just be seen as the cost of doing business, which is why the reforms came through.
Or it's an insurance policy. That's seen as an insurance policy. It's seen in that way as a cost. So therefore, let's try and cut costs, not try and be active in that space in there. So yeah, no, I think that's the thing. And you're right about insurance. The margins now and the exclusions that used to be there. Previously, some policies would actually pay ransom. Now they don't. So everything, and when they go in and regardless of your business, you go in there and the insurance companies will, if you think that you're going in down and deep, the insurance companies will as well. You'll have to give a lot of information for them to assess your risk and that exposure. And the whole industry is getting smashed. So it's not, whilst it's important to get it, it's not going to be a pleasant experience. It's not going to be fun in that regard in cyber insurance space. So.
I think insurance companies will do anything to try and get out of insurance.
The level of exclusions, including phishing and that, which is part of the thing, they just start excluding it all.
Yeah, they're all exclusions now. It's incredibly, unless you want to pay a hell of a lot of money.
Yeah.
And even then, you've got to meet certain requirements and tick certain boxes, and they need access to all this information. And it's just unreasonable to have medium and normal large businesses, is what most of us here would be, to actually do that. And like I said, it really is something that at the level like Qantas that can only pay for some of that.
And the big companies too, without dropping names, I provided the risk, insurance advice for Bridgestone, Australia, New Zealand. They weren't getting a lot of benefit out of it. So it doesn't matter how big you are, it's very difficult.
Well, perhaps then the approach would be to have that as not as the be all and end all, but have that as one of the risk mitigation strategies that the company employs. So, other things could be like having testing the environments constantly through your IT and speaking with your software vendors to see what they're doing in that space as well, to ensure that their product is, is as safe as it can be. And also understand the processes around data extraction as well, so that if something has been compromised that you need to report, that you know how to address the data extraction side of it as well. So having a data breach response plan is a key tool in the business. I was lucky that I actually had one, so it's really is that that checklist of, okay, what are all of the things that I need to do? I need to call the insurance broker. I need to, talk to the Law Society. I need to call the Privacy Commissioner and see if there's anything that I need to report here. Understanding the forensic analysis and what pays out. But just to give you for cyber insurance, that whole process cost me. If I didn't have cyber insurance, it would have cost me about $60,000. There's just no way that I would have sent me if I didn't have it. So, but I would like to actually have a chat with you offline.
Well, worth the 80,000 in premiums you paid for that.
Yes.
I have an IT services company, so I see this every day. And believe me, there's some stories that we can share with you. But one of the things that you alluded to, which is a business continuity plan, which is part of your disaster recovery plan, is absolutely critical. And the first number that you should have as a business when this happens in your phone is your law firm, because the lawyer needs to be able to make the necessary contact with those people, particularly in the event of an transfer.
Yes.
We recently had a situation with another IT company that was optimised. There were over 100 customers. It was a hosting-based business out of Adelaide last year. And it wasn't just the cost to get those businesses back up and operational, the reputational damage
Yes.
it's done to its customers, it was irrecoverable. So, yeah, bear in mind, and there's a lot of very valid points that they made. And essentially, it's really just a guidance, but I would imagine that a lot of the information that we put up, whilst I understand it, I question whether or not the rest of the audience understand what that means to them.
Well, this is really just the tip of the iceberg. I wanted to start by giving a quite, broad overview of where we sit and where we're going as well. So I went to a few defence things last week and they highlighted that this is a key area of focus for them and the government is taking it very, very seriously as well. So we'll see a lot more in this space and as I'm sure we'll see a lot more data breaches as well. So I think, the message is to understand your obligations and what you need to do, where you sit and how to respond if it does happen to you.
One more
Yes,
quick
of
one.
course.
I think the AIDS mitigation strategies, which are very good, but they're systemic, should be 9. The one that's missing is the human factor, human vigilance training, because you can have all the systems in place, but it's very difficult to stop emails arriving that have got malicious links in it. It's up to the individual in front of the screen not to click the link. And I'm sure many of the many those that work in the industry would know are the result of simple human failure.
Yes.
Is that a result of lack of training, lack of employee awareness? So just throw that in there.
Can I just sneak one in that human factor is often missed in this? Some of the stories and analysis come out of Medibank. There's actually staff being targeted, so you then had absenteeism. They actually had to close branches because of security incidents. They had to employ security guards,
Right.
and people just quit, left the business. So a huge cost to that business.
And we'll see it continue.
I think that's the fundamental challenge with a lot of what the government's trying to do. It's all admirable, but it's very focused on the technical, the essential aid, whilst important. You're right, number 9, people training that awareness, where the GDPR at least has an obligation that you're providing training and awareness and closing that part of it, because you've obviously technology, people, processes. They focus on that at the expense of that people side of things.
Well, they've had the penalties in place since 2018. We've only just caught up last year.
Yeah.
So
one good question on the penalties that they're talking about in terms of the board and at that level of penalties. Are they aiming in tightening those restrictions up or increasing the penalties to boards for these breaches?
I think that what will happen is that the AIC will be given further powers to investigate and, if necessary, refer to the appropriate authorities, so such as the ACCC or ASIC, to look at the matters like that.
Yeah, so I'm not saying it's equated to manslaughter or anything else or work health and safety, but entering into that space there, if it's serious enough, you can, because that'll shake up.
Absolutely. Well, you'd have to look at personal liability of directors. But it's about utilising the appropriate government channels for that. I don't know. I'd have to look into it.
Yeah.
I don't know if the commissioner would have that level of power, but it would certainly have the power to engage further agencies as required.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Please have some sandwiches with Dave and it's been lovely to present to you today. I hope that you've got something out of this, and we hope to see you back here very, very soon.